Well, hi, church. Thank you for tuning in. We are midway through Holy Week. Tonight, it's Wednesday today, is our Passover meal. As a church, it's going to be neat. Most of us have never done one before. I've never been in one, but I'm excited for it. And those of you who are in our church who are signed up, it'll be neat to do this tonight. I'm really excited about it. It is midway through the Holy Week, and this is a cool part of it that points us to Jesus. But in our study today, where we're in the book of Mark, I'm actually going to be over in chapter 11 and 12, tying some things up there. And it's kind of a long section, so I'm not going to read the whole thing to you right now, but it is Mark 11, verse 27, all the way through Mark 12, verse 12. So, and that's where we'll kind of cover. But it's right after, of course, Jesus cleansed the temple, kicked out everybody, basically. He also cursed the fig tree. We've looked at that over the past couple of days. And then something very normal and natural that makes complete sense would happen next. They come back to Jerusalem, verse 27. They came again to Jerusalem, and as he was walking in the temple, think about that. He's going back to Jerusalem, and he's back in the temple. And they're like, oh, this is the guy that kicked us all out of here. You can imagine a lot of people, oh, he's back, now what's going to happen? He's walking in the temple. The chief priests and the scribes and the elders came to him. These are the guys, the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. These are the ones. For some reason, the Pharisees always get the bad name in your Bible. Everybody thinks, oh, the Pharisees, they're the bad ones in the New Testament. And yes, a lot of them were. All right, but not all of them. Nicodemus was a great one. Okay, but the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders, these guys are the leaders of the temple. The Pharisees are not leaders of the temple. Pharisees were a sect of very strict religious people. They weren't necessarily leaders. You could be a Pharisee and be a peasant living up in Galilee. You could be a Pharisee and be rich living in Jerusalem. You could be a Pharisee and be anybody. And you could stop being a Pharisee whenever you wanted, or you could start up whenever you wanted. It was a choice. It's a lifestyle. It's not a job title. All right, but these guys, the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders, these guys are job titles. The chief priests, these guys are born into the line of Aaron, right? And not all of them were bad either, by the way. Certainly Zacharias, John the Baptist's dad was a good one. John the Baptist was in the line to be one of the chief priests, but obviously he was killed. So anyway, they come to him. They're the ones in charge of the temple. The elders, that's like a board of directors kind of group of people that, somebody's in charge of this temple. Somebody's making sure everything's working right. And now yesterday, Jesus comes in and it throws everybody out. They come to him and they say, by what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you this authority to do them? We're the authorities of the temple. We're the guys to take care of it. That's essentially their job. They're the caretakers of it. They have to manage it. They oversee it. Okay? Who gave you this authority to go shut everybody down? What happened? What was going on? It's a reasonable question to ask. It doesn't. Now, knowing who these people are and knowing how they feel about Jesus, we know that they had some bad motives in this too. They already don't like him. But anybody would ask it. It's a reasonable question. You better have some authority if you're going to go into God's house and start throwing stuff out, right? What authority do you have, buddy? Jesus said to them, he knows that they aren't really ready to hear the answer, okay? He knows that even though it is a completely reasonable question to ask, he knows what's in their hearts, and their hearts are against him, okay? He knows this. He's kind of going to test them right back. There might be some who might have softened hearts, who might be open to some truth, and he's going to test them here, okay? He says, I'll ask you one question, and you answer me. And I will tell you, and then I will tell you by what authority I do these things. And he says to them, was the baptism of John the Baptist, remember, a line of the priests. They absolutely knew who John the Baptist was. Incredible leader. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from man? That's the question he asks them. It's an important question, okay, especially anybody who was living in that time, even nowadays, but the bigger question is whose authority does Jesus have? But it's a very good starting point for him. Verse 31, they discussed it with one another, saying, if we say from heaven, if we say John's baptism was from heaven, he will say, then why didn't you believe him? reasonable. Like if you think John the Baptist is a prophet sent from heaven, you would believe stuff he said, right? Naturally. Okay. But if we say he was from man, they were afraid of the people, for the people held that John really was a prophet. And so they answered Jesus, "We do not know." And Jesus said to them, "Then neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." The correct answer for whose authority did John have? Where did John get his authority? The correct answer is from heaven. Jesus says, was it from heaven or was it from man? The right answer, the correct one, is John got his authority from heaven. Okay? The question that the priests and the scribes and the elders asked Jesus, by what authority do you do these things? The correct answer is, once again, it's from heaven. I have authority from heaven. Jesus says this in Matthew 28, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me, right? So the right answer in both questions, the question the scribes ask him and the question he asks them, by what authority is this done? The answer to both is from heaven. That's the correct answer. Okay. Now, not only that, but I think these guys even have a reasonable guess that that's the right answer. Okay. They didn't want to obey John, and they don't want to obey Jesus, but they also don't want to admit, they don't want to say out loud that these guys' authority comes from man because they're afraid of the people. Okay. So they answer, we don't know. They get all waffly about it. These are the spiritual leaders. These are the guys in charge of the temple. These are the guys that should know the answer to any pressing contemporary spiritual question of the day. Is this a false teacher? This guy that has huge crowds marching into Jerusalem, worshiping him? Is he a false teacher or a true teacher? If you're a spiritual leader and you see that going on, you should know the answer. And if you know the answer, you should absolutely say it. Okay, John the Baptist was out and about for years, leading people out in the wilderness, baptizing them and everything else. If the Pharisees went to him, you can read about it. They went to him. He called them a brood of vipers. Okay, these guys went to him. They went out there to inspect it and to watch it and stuff. And I don't know, I visualized them standing in the back with their arms folded and crossed and just kind of a frown on their face, listening to see if they can catch him in a heresy of some sort and nitpick something he said. And of course, that's exactly what they did, and it's exactly what they did to Jesus. Okay? So they are not looking to find out if this guy is telling the truth. They are looking for ways to silence him or things to hold against him. There is a tendency to do that, a temptation. You see somebody successful, there is a temptation, maybe not always, maybe not every person, but there is absolutely a temptation for many people in many situations. See somebody successful and try to nitpick them and find out some reason or some way, some manner in which you can criticize them and somehow feel better about yourself because you aren't as successful and now you're going to tear them down too. That's the impression I get from these guys, okay? They like their power, they like their authority, and John could have been part of them, been a priest, but he chose to go off and follow God directly and lead people to God directly. And so he's leaving our system, so we don't like him. Jesus was never even born into the system. He's from Galilee. He's Nazareth. He's a nobody to them, and so they see him as a threat. Okay, now Jesus then begins to speak to them in parables. Chapter 12, verse 1 tells a story about a man planted a vineyard, a fence, did it all, built it all up. Gave him everything, and then he goes away. Okay, he sent a servant. He leases out to some tenants. Okay, tenants. These are caretakers. These are stewards of his big vineyard that he has made, and he's done everything for it. He's prepared it. He's laid it all out for them, and now there's tenants that are going to lease it, and they're going to run the thing, and all this. And he goes to another country, and he's long gone. So he sends some servants to them, and to check in on things and to see how it's all going, and to get some of the fruit from the vineyard, he says. And they beat up the servants, send them away empty-handed. Then he sent another servant to do the same thing. They kill a servant, and then finally, it says, verse 6, he sent still another, a beloved son. Finally, he sent him to them, saying, they will respect my son. Right? But those tenants said to one another, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. And they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. What will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the tenants and give the vineyard to others. Have you not read the scripture? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing. It's marvelous in our eyes. And so they were seeking to arrest him, but feared the people, for they perceived that he had told the parable against them. And so they left him and went away. The parable is a further answer to the question, by what authority do you do these things? And the follow-up question, by what authority did John do these things? This parable is the answer to that, okay? God gave the people, his chosen people, think of that as the vineyard, people of Israel. That's his chosen people. He made them. He gave them their nation. He gave them their cities. He did it all. There they are. He put caretakers there, spiritual leaders, caretakers, priests, to oversee the spiritual growth and maturity and health of God's people. God's people are the vineyard. The priests are the caretakers, the tenants, okay? The scribes are part of that. The elders are part of that. Their job is the spiritual upkeep of Israel. In the parable, the job of the tenants is the gardening upkeep of the vineyard, right? Whose vineyard is it? It's God's. It's in the parable, it's the owners, right? Think even all the way back to Genesis, when God made a garden and put Adam in it to take care of it. And he said, you'll have dominion over all of this, and you're to cultivate it, and you're a steward of it. Okay? That's the same idea. He put the priests in charge as stewards, as spiritual dominion over the people of Israel, to lead them close to God, to follow the Lord. The scribes, these are the guys that are making sure all the prophets and the books of the law are accurately taught and copied so that more people can have them and read them and everything else. And instead, what do they do all through the Old Testament? And this comes up frequently in the New Testament. They remind them. Stephen says, which of the prophets did you not persecute? Okay, Jesus says it the same. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills its prophets, right? And so the prophets are the servants that the owner sends back to the vineyard. They're the prophets that God sends to Israel to remind them of God's truth, because the actual spiritual caretakers that God put in place, the priests and so on, are failing. And so God has sent prophets continuously through the Old Testament, and many of them were persecuted often. Jeremiah, the prophet, is probably the most prominent example of a prophet being just continuously persecuted by his own people, by the spiritual leaders, by false prophets, and all this other stuff. Elijah was constantly being hunted, right? The true prophets, but the people who are supposed to be all on their same team, working for the spiritual maturity of their people, instead are working against them. And so, finally, the last servant God sent was John the Baptist. Again, this parable is an answer to the question. John the Baptist is the last one. What did they do to him? Well, they didn't like him. He was out in the wilderness. They didn't like him, and eventually Herod had him killed. You might not know this, but Herod was Jewish. He was a Jewish king, or he's a half Jew at minimum. He was part of God's people, and he kills God's prophet. Right? Small little aside there, but these prophets, in reality, are the metaphor or whatever in this parable of what the servants are. That the owner keeps sending servants, hey, check on this, make sure things are running, and they just keep mistreating them. And so finally, the owner of the vineyard sends his son, saying, they'll respect my son. And exactly what God did, of course, I'm going to send my son. So when the scribes and elders and the priests and stuff say, Jesus, by what authority are you doing these things, meaning cleaning out the temple, which was their job. They're the ones that are supposed to oversee the temple. You get that? They're the elders. They're the board of directors. They're the priests that manage the temple. And it's turned into a den of thieves and robbers. And it's supposed to be a house of prayer for the nations. And so God has sent prophets warning them continuously for hundreds of years. And finally, he sends his son to, hey, clean house here. These guys are not respecting my servants. They are not respecting the prophets. Clean up. And now Jesus goes and does it. And they're like, hey, Jesus, what authority do you have to do it? He's like, it's my dad's house. And it's my house. And it's to worship. And it's to pray for the nations. And you guys, what authority are you misleading the people? That's the real question. But they've rejected it. They've rejected God, and now they're so squishy. When he asks them a pointed, direct question, they're like, I don't know. I'm afraid of what the people might say. They're ridiculous, and it's evil. Okay, poor leadership. Sometimes it's just poor leadership. Other times it's evil. Okay, In this case, it had reached a point where it was just evil. They were rejecting righteousness. Okay. But twice it says here that they feared the people. 11, verse 32, what shall we say? Should we say that John was from man, but they were afraid of the people? And then it says in chapter 12, verse 12, they were seeking to arrest him, but feared the people, for they perceived that he had told the parable against them. They understood the parable, and they knew what role they had in that parable. They're the bad guys. Okay? Did they get the full point that, hey, in the parable, the owner sends his son after they've killed a bunch of the other servants? And this Jesus guy, did they get the full point that maybe Jesus is actually the son, God's son in this parable? I don't know exactly what they got from it, but they perceived that he told it against them. They understood enough to know that we're the bad guys in this story. They understood it. These are smart people. These are not dunces and bums. They're smart, intelligent people that know their Bibles extremely well, that have some degree of just leadership capabilities, that they've become elders and they've become chief priests, and they're respected in the temple. You don't get that way just by not knowing anything. They're able to track with him. They're able to follow what he's saying. They just don't like it, and they're afraid of the people. Okay, they like their power. They're afraid that if the people turn against them, they will lose their power. The people of Jerusalem at times were capable of some really nasty riots. So maybe they're not only afraid of losing their power, maybe they're afraid of actually being in danger. I don't know for sure. They just saw a big crowd march into Jerusalem with Jesus. He has a lot of people at his fingertips that he could call to action or something, and they're afraid of it. All right, they miss the point of who he is. They miss the point of what he's up to. They refuse to answer his direct question because they're afraid, and their fear keeps them from Christ. And their fear is misplaced because they're talking to God, and the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom and the beginning of knowledge, and yet they're afraid of people. Their job is to be the caretakers. They're supposed to be taking care of the people, not being afraid of them. But if you're evil, you're going to be afraid of the people that you're evil towards, right? Because you're sneaking around doing evil stuff. Sooner or later, they're going to come at you. Their conscience, their fears are misplaced because they should be fearing God. But they're also, the fact that they have something to fear from the people kind of indicates that they must be way off base, right? You would think, you would hope. But their solution is to find ways to kill him. And they're going to find a way to do it in the middle of the night when nobody sees, when nobody's around, to get him arrested, to get him through the system and everything else, so that by the morning he's already been condemned and people can't stop it. And now he's in the Romans' hands, and the Romans are going to oversee the execution, and we get to stand back, and nobody will come after us. That's their plan. They're going to be putting it together here in the next couple days. All right, so what does it mean for you? How do we tie it together for personal application for Holy Week right now? Make Holy Week holy. Well, first of all, recognize the authority of Jesus. Okay? He has authority. By what authority do you say these things, Jesus? By all authority. All of it. Heaven and earth, everything. By all authority. Okay? So ask yourself, or get on your knees and pray, and humbled before the Lord, ask the question, do I submit to Jesus' authority? Ask a question, do I fear something that isn't God? Do I fear the people? Do I fear losing this or gaining that or whatever? Do you fear something? Well, fear God, and then you don't have to fear anything else. If they had a true fear of God, they wouldn't have to worry about fearing the people. They would say, hey, we're accountable to God. So God's eternal. God's all-powerful. We're not accountable to the people directly. We're accountable to God. And then they would take things seriously, and they would ask the real questions and get the real answers. All right, but now Jesus asks the real question, and oh, we don't know. We're going to pretend we don't know the answer to that. And when he tells them a parable, they're going to just try to silence him by getting him arrested or something. But they're afraid even to do that right now at this point in the story. So for you, fear God. For you, recognize God's authority in your life. Is there something there that you're resistant to? Deal with it. Get it dealt with. All right? Go to the Lord. Go to Christ. Say, God, forgive me. I have not accepted your authority. All right, a good way to do this, a good, simple little thing. We've done this in past years, often on Palm Sunday. I did not do it this year in my sermon, but the sermon was on the same subject at least. You write up a document, a piece of paper. You can handwrite it, you can type it. I don't care. You can make it look all formal or whatever. You're writing up a deed, like when you buy a house, you get a deed that says you own a house, or whatever. When you buy a new cell phone contract, you sign some paper for 2 years. I'm going to make my payments of $50.99 or whatever, and you sign a contract, and you write on the thing, my life, my house, my family, my children, my wife, my pet dog, my truck, my whatever. Jesus, I sign over everything I have to you. It's yours. And maybe that's a useful thing, and you don't have to do that. But it's a way of saying, I am under God's authority. I give him everything. All right, we so often are asking him for things, like John and James did. Jesus, whenever you enter your kingdom, we want to see you right and left. Yeah, cool. Wouldn't that be great? I would love to too, right? But are you in it for what you get out of it, or are you giving everything to him? That's the real question. Are you giving everything to Christ? The rich guy that we looked at the other day, he didn't want to give everything to Christ, so he went away sad. These scribes and people, they don't want to recognize his authority, so they go away and plot how to kill him because they're afraid of the people and they want him dead, and it's miserable. And you can follow everybody who follows Jesus. Like, you get these two different kinds of people. You get people that go away from Jesus angry, sad, confused, violent, whatever. And you get people that come to Jesus and just stay with him and they rejoice. There's only two kinds of people there, okay? And it's entirely based around, do you follow Jesus with everything you've got? And if you don't, you inevitably go away sad or mad or hurt or offended or whatever. And if you do, man, you give up everything and follow him, you gain everything, and it's joy. So sign over your life to Christ. Make up a document, do whatever. Sign it over to Christ. Glory to God. We'll continue building into this Holy Week stuff over the next couple days. I'll see you tonight at the Passover meal. I'll see you tomorrow on the videos, and glory to God.